Hi and welcome everyone to this Photoshop tutorial. Today we're going to be discussing Adobe Camera Raw and the power that it has before you even work on your image in Photoshop. So we shot our image here of these beautiful lamb chops in the RAW format in the camera, and we're just going to double click on it and open it up into Photoshop. Automatically the Adobe Camera Raw box appears, and you can see right away there's lots of different options that you have to change and affect your photo. There's a toolbar up to the top left right here, and it'll have some adjustment brushes, some gradient filters, the ability to rotate your image and zoom in. To the right, there's also this menu bar that has lots of sliders, as well as various other menus in here that you can use to affect your photo. Today we're going to be using pretty much the simple parts of Adobe Camera Raw. It's a big part of Photoshop in its own right, and we're just going to be using some of the basic tools that I use for my workflow when it comes to post-production on my photos. So the things that we're going to be doing today in ACR is affecting the exposure, some of the clarity and saturation, and also using the adjustment brushes and the gradient filters. I'm just going to kind of go down this list of sliders in kind of order. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is affecting the white balance. Now my Canon 5D shoots a little bit warm, so I'm just going to change my white balance. I can do it either through the drop down menu with these kind of automatic settings that it has. And I can also do it manually, either by typing in the number or just moving the slider to the left or right, making it cooler or warmer. I know kind of what I want for my white balance. It's going to be around 4400. Oops, 4400. And that's kind of the typical white balance that I use when I'm using my Canon 5D. I can affect the tint, but we're not going to be doing that right now because it looks pretty good. The next thing, I'm just going to move down the list. I'm not going to be really using these sliders, the exposure, contrast, highlights, and shadows. I'm not going to be really using these sliders right now because I'm going to do that later using the adjustment brushes, and I'll show you how to do that. It's really great. These are more of global changes. You can see as I move one to the left or right, it globally increases or decreases the exposure. But I kind of want to do that in specific areas, so I don't really want to do it globally. Now, what I do want to do globally is to affect the whites, and I'm just going to give it a plus 10 on the white and kind of a minus 10 on the blacks, and these will kind of anchor my whites and blacks. That way I can have true white and true black when I print the image. I'm going to go to clarity and kind of just increase globally the clarity. Maybe I'll just give it a 20, a plus 20. I'm not going to be really doing much with the saturation or vibrance. The saturation I'm going to apply separately using the adjustment brushes. So that's pretty much it right now for this area. I'm going to move over and click on the adjustment brush or press K on your keyboard. What's really great about these brushes is that you can affect each stroke separately if you'd like. So I'm going to paint right now. I'm just going to set this to 0. Set everything to 0, and as I paint, nothing will change. It won't even let me paint on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the exposure, because I'm going to be brushing in this highlight. I kind of want to make this highlight a little bit brighter, so I'm going to be increasing the exposure to say 1, and then I'm going to paint just on the highlight, and you can see as I paint, the highlight gets brighter. Really cool. Alright, but I can also see that I had a little bit of problems here because my paintbrush was too big, and I painted on the plate, making the plate a little bit brighter. Don't really want to do that. If you want to exactly see where you've painted, you can click on this little mask button here. You can toggle it on and off, and it'll show you where you've painted, and I can see I've painted on that plate, so I don't really want it there. So how do I erase the paintbrush? Well, I just press the Alt or Option button, and I get a new paintbrush, and then I can erase by painting where I don't want it to be. So I'm going to clear it off that plate, clear it off the rest of the areas that I don't want that, where I don't want it to be brighter. I only really want that highlight to be brighter with this brush stroke and nothing else, because I'm going to be affecting the rest of the image differently, in different ways with different brush strokes. Okay, so now I just have that highlight brushed in, and I'm going to toggle it off. It looks nice and great. Maybe next I'll fill in this shadow. So I'm going to add a new brush by clicking new. And I'm going to decrease the exposure. I don't want it the same brightness as the highlight, so I'm going to decrease it to about 0.60. And I'm just going to paint, make my brush a little bit smaller, and just paint in these shadow areas. Fill in those shadow areas. Not a big change, but it is definitely significant. Okay, and I'm going to turn that mask on, and I can see I painted a little bit on the plate, so I can just easily press my Alt or Option button, get a new erase brush, and just erase that mask or that paint off of the plate and anywhere else I don't want it to be, like on the highlight and stuff. Okay, you can see that I have now two brushes, and I can toggle between the two brushes by clicking on the pins. So I can click on this brush if I wanted to affect this brush again, change something, or I could click on this brush and do the same. I could change something on this brush again. I want to create now, I actually want to create now a gradient filter for the background and for the foreground. A gradient filter is just like the filter that you place on your camera, like a neutral density filter. So you can click and drag down the filter, but I want to make my background a little bit darker, so I'm going to press maybe -1. And then I'll click and drag on my background, and you can see it's become darker in a gradient, which is really helpful and a lot quicker than the paintbrush when you're doing large areas. And maybe I'll do it same with the foreground, giving myself like a little vignette on my photo. Okay, so that's pretty good. Maybe I'll make it a little bit darker, maybe somewhere around 1.4. And I can click on this gradient and make that a little bit darker, maybe around 1.4. So you can always go back, and this is what's so great about using Adobe Camera Raw, is because you can always go back, even later, a week later, you can go back and you can change this settings, because it saves it as a separate file. So you can go back and edit that file, and it's non-destructive, so you don't have to worry about losing pixels or quality as you're editing even months later down the road. So that's one of the biggest benefits about using Adobe Camera Raw. Okay, so I've got my gradient filter, I've got some adjustment brushes, but now I think I'm going to go and add a couple more brushes, and I'm going to desaturate. I'm going to desaturate the background and desaturate this table a little bit, and add some saturation to my food. So that way my food really just pops off the plate, pops away from the background. It's really separated. So I'm going to choose kind of a 0 on the exposure. I don't want anything to get brighter or darker in this step. And I'm going to choose maybe a -30 on the saturation, and I'm just going to paint the table now. I'm going to turn this mask off so I can kind of see what I'm doing, and just paint this table. I don't really want to touch the food when I'm desaturating it. Only the table and the background. Alright, there we go. Looking pretty good. Okay. And now I'm going to select a new brush, and this time I'm going to saturate it. So I'm going to go +30. And I'm going to saturate just the food, making it a lot more colorful. And it just pops right off that plate or off the background. Alright. There we go. And maybe add some saturation to this rosemary. Pretty sweet. You can kind of just hover over these pins and the mask will show up or highlight, so you can see kind of quickly where you've painted. Like that. I think that's about it for this photo and the Adobe Camera Raw. I will open it up now into Photoshop and do some of my destructive editing, like clone stamping and healing brush, and maybe remove some of this stuff on the plate that's not so pretty. I also then add my sharpening and then print it or save it for the web. But if I really wanted to, I could remove some of these spots in Adobe Camera Raw. It has a really cool spot removal brush, and you can just click on that, click on the spot, and Adobe will, ACR will kind of pick a spot automatically where it replaces that information from. So it gives you two circles. One's where it's choosing, or one's where it's sampling, and one's where it's copying that sample. Now you can move this green sampling area anywhere you want in the image if it's not good enough for you by default. And you can see it really easily and nicely. It does a pretty nice job of removing those spots. And I can click wherever I want to kind of remove spots around my image. But I think I can do this a lot faster in Photoshop itself using like the clone stamp or the patch tool or the healing brush tool. So I'm not going to do all this detail work in Adobe Camera Raw. I mean, there's a lot of little tiny spots that I need to remove. I can sharpen it if I wanted to, so I can go into this detail area and I can affect the sharpening or remove noise and do some noise reduction on the raw image. There's lots of things that you can do. You can do curves, you can change the lens correction, you can do some lens correction if you wanted to. It has automatic profiles depending on the camera that you're using. You can see that it automatically knows what lens I'm using, and it can affect the distortion and the vignetting for that lens that you're using. I don't think I really need to do, it doesn't really change my photo that much. I don't really need to do any kind of lens profile correction. So I'm pretty much done with the ACR, and this is what I would do for my workflow. So I'd first open it up in ACR, do these kind of basic corrections on the raw, and then go to Photoshop and do some of my major corrections like retouching and stuff like that, blending images. I would do all that in Photoshop. I really like ACR. I do use Lightroom, and I know some of you are saying right now that all this stuff you can do in Lightroom, and it's true, you can do all this stuff in Lightroom because it's the same engine. The same engine that runs the ACR program in Photoshop is the same engine that's used to run Lightroom. So you can do this all in Lightroom, and the reason why I would like and prefer to do it in Photoshop is because it makes it a standalone program. You don't need to work between two programs. So, just for workflow reasons, it's just so much faster. I already have my file organization system, and I can open up my photo in ACR Raw, do all the changes just like I would do in Lightroom. Click open, and the image opens into Photoshop. I can do my spot removal, save it as a TIFF, and move on to the next image. But that's just me. A lot of people love Lightroom, and that's great. I also love it for what it can do, but I found a new love for ACR. It's a very powerful tool, and one that I think every photographer should be using. I hope you find this tutorial great and helpful, and if you have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment box below. This is Skylar Burt from WeTogether.com, signing off.